all the people that are out shopping and the way they spend money, especially if it's my wife. Why, no, Lori is quite, don't tell her I said that. No, please. Anyway, so the signs are not good. But let me give you some positive stuff. You know, human capital, a great idea, some creative genius that somebody came up with about a new generation of French fries or computer chips or management services or software or something like that. And the third thing is capital, is money. Those are the three things that makes this magic in our marketplace work. And that's the same thing that works every time and kind of gets ginned up every time we run into a hole in the economy and we see these downturns. Let me remind you, when I became Lieutenant Governor in 1986, and I stood on the Capitol steps along with Cecil Andrus, and for the first time took the oath of office as Lieutenant Governor, as he did for Governor, his second life as Governor. We were faced with a $17 million deficit in roughly a $480 million budget. That's not a whole lot different than what we're looking at today, folks. We had double-digit unemployment. We had interest rates that nobody knew where they were. All they knew is they were high. And the capital and the amortization rate on any kind of a capital investment was way off the charts, because you couldn't afford to rent the money at 20%, 18%, 17%, and still look over the top of that and say, okay, how fast can I amortize this? Because it just simply wasn't going to happen. Not at those kind of interest rates to rent the money. We also had probably the worst thing, and many of you who were in the business you're in today may have remembered this, that we had 5,000 families between 1984 and 1986. We had 5,000 families picked up and left Idaho because they said their economic future was not in the state. And so we went from 1,003,000 people to 998,000 people during those 2 years. That's the worst, because that's desperation. That's just giving up. That's saying, hey, we're out of this thing. Well, now that was 1987. And I would remind you, we had a $15 billion economy then. The total accumulation of all the economic activity in the state, farms and mining and timbering and real estate sales and construction and everything else, was $15 billion. How many years ago was that? Wasn't that long ago, really. But I will tell you this, today we're a $51 billion economy. Today we're 1,460,000 citizens in the state of Idaho. And today our financial institutions are in better shape than anybody else's in the country because they didn't get caught up in that feverish subprime loan business. And one of the reasons they didn't is because many of them had been there before, obviously, but the state chartered institutions especially, Gavin Gee does a tremendous job of watching those. In fact, sometimes I used to consider it, he was too watchful. That's, of course, when I was in the banking business. Say, here comes another state auditor. But they've done a good job. And so today, if you've got the human capital, if you've got the people that can do the work, and you got somebody that sat around and thought up the next newest and most fancy mousetrap, the next generation of any products that we've got in this state today, the capital's going to be available. And I can tell you in 1987 that wasn't the case, because the capital may well have been available, but the amortization rate and the investment quotient for that was not available. There was no way you could borrow money at 20% and try to build you a plant and put people in it and turn products out unless, of course, maybe you were getting 80% return on the products that you were making, and those, of course, were unheard of. And so it couldn't happen. But today it can. Our financial institutions in Idaho are in great shape, and they're going to continue to be in great shape. And so where the credit is good, the money's going to be available. Where the ideas are good, the money's going to be available. And I would tell you one of the things that we're working the hardest on. You may have seen not too long ago a headline in some newspaper that said, quoted me saying, we do have a lot of jobs around Idaho. And we do. Jobs that are looking for slots. But the problem is we don't have the skill for that person to get that job. Let me give you one example. Premier Technology. Premier Technology, the first time I saw it was a little company that was struggling with the newest kind of vessel for the solid and nuclear waste disposal that was coming out of the INL repository, solid waste repository in eastern Idaho, would be loaded into these vessels and then shipped to the WIP site down in New Mexico, down to the salt mines in New Mexico. And this kid, Doug Sayer, along with a couple of his partners, invented one of those new mousetraps and how to better weld and how to strengthen the metal a little bit more. And so he started this little company in Pocatello, Idaho, and they had a little hangar that they were working in out at the airport when I first met him. And a lot of the work they were doing outside, and the office that we met in was an old 3-bedroom, 10-foot wide Great Lakes trailer house. That was their office. And this was when I was in Congress, because I was on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and Billy Tozen had appointed me the guy to kind of head up the nuclear advancement and nuclear waste effort because of the location of INL in Idaho. You know, you may think we're the only ones that know about that tremendous potential that we've got over there as far as equalizing our energy needs across this nation. But the world in Areva, the $2.5 billion investment, just proved that when they selected Idaho to come to Idaho and build their beneficiation plant, their enrichment plant for uranium, for the fuels for the future nuclear energy production plants that we're going to have. Anyway, Doug invented this welding, and it's pretty expertise. I don't even begin to try to understand it. But anyway, he was in this little hangar in Pocatello, and there was a big company, interestingly enough, out of Houston, Texas, that was trying to get him to come down there. It was called NASA. And they said, we'd like to have you come down here because we think you're onto something here that we don't totally understand it yet, but we think it'd be great for the rocket fuel, the solid fuel rocket vessels that we need, that we put on the side of the spaceship when we send them up toward the heavens. Anyway, we got Doug a little bit of money. Doug decided instead to build in Blackfoot, Idaho. He's now doubled the size of that 120,000 square foot plant. He cannot find the people that he needs in order to develop this kind of welding. Yes, he did get the NASA project. And when I was over there last week, we went through these great big bullet-looking things, like whatever that is. These great big bullet-looking things that go on the side of the Apollo spaceships and boost it all the way into orbit where it needs to go. And he's so desperate for folks, he went to his hometown of Mackay, Idaho. Anybody know where Mackay is? How do you know? Not on a map. No, it is on a map. But they used to say, well, where was Caldwell, Idaho? When I was born, I was born and raised in Caldwell when I was growing up, and I started going around the United States selling French fries for Simplot, and I'd be in some place in New York or Florida